It was one of my greatest honors in my hobby journey to become good friends with Super Collector Marshall Fogel and to hold his $50 million Mickey Mantle card. Today, I'm going to tell you the most important lessons I learned from him about collecting, investing, and life.
I'm feeling good. Getting better. Feeling good. I can't let it go. I'm feeling good. 'Cause I never say never.
Hello, and here we go. Welcome to another episode of The Geoff Wilson Show. Stories from generations ago often include an old wise man or a smart village elder who imparts his wisdom on the young, scrappy up-and-comer to help him see more clearly ahead. Well, I've lived this experience with Super Collector Marshall Fogel. Marshall, who owns one of the greatest card and memorabilia collections on earth, including the $50 million Mickey Mantle card, has become a good friend. And when Marshall talks, I listen. His words contain tremendous wisdom and insight into how to build a world-class collection. Marshall has taught me to play the long game, to lean into storytelling, and to buy less, but to buy the absolute best quality possible, among other very valuable lessons. And although Marshall has tremendous success and has built tremendous wealth, he remains down to earth, never takes himself too seriously, and enjoys many great laughs. It's been an honor to get to know someone so wise, and today on The Geoff Wilson Show, I'm going to share with you 10 lessons I've learned from him. So Kelly,
hi.
It's going to be a fun episode.
It will be a fun episode.
I've really enjoyed hanging out with Marshall. He is a character. He is a class act. And I've learned a lot from him. And so I'm excited to dive into this today.
I haven't had the privilege of meeting Marshall in person, but I have had the privilege of speaking with him on the phone. And he is a character.
Yeah,
he is really just absolutely heartwarming, even on the other side of a phone. I mean, he's just generous. He's kind. He's very intelligent, very smart. And like you said, I'm sure there's a plethora of things that you've learned from him already.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure there's things that you're going to learn more. I mean, we've visited him now twice as far as trips out there, and I feel like you're always eager to go back.
Oh, I'm excited. I want to go.
We'll go again. We haven't even tipped the tip of the iceberg is what we've covered, but the bottom is still there.
Oh yeah, and there's so much of his collection still to be uncovered.
Which, by the way, if anybody actually, maybe is watching this and doesn't know about who Marshall Fogel is, what his collection is, we'll put a link in the actual video. If you're listening to this on podcast, just be sure to check out the Geoff Wilson Show on YouTube. We'll link all that up for you so you can see.
And go to Sports Card Investor on YouTube, because the video we did last weekend about his 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle card, the most expensive trading card of all time.
Right.
Great video. We did one with him the Sunday before, going through a lot of his other parts of his collection. And we have more videos that are going to be coming up here in the next couple of weeks on the Sports Card Investor YouTube. Just incredible stuff. Yeah, absolutely incredible.
But let's talk about the premier card, right? So again, like you said, we just recently did a video about this with the 1952 Mickey Mantle. The thought here is that it's worth $50 million. Do you think that's an accurate and fair assessment of the card? First off, it's gorgeous. Like, it is by far one of the most beautiful vintage cards I've ever seen. But $50 million?
I estimated that the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle PSA 10 is worth $50 million. The best copy of it, Marshall Fogel's copy. There's a lot of naysayers in the comments that say I'm absolutely crazy, that wouldn't sell for anything close to that. I actually think it would sell for more than $50 million.
Wow. Okay.
I think it's worth more. And here's why, a couple of reasons. So first of all, the SGC 9.5 of the same card sold for over $12 million.
Right.
There's rumors that one of the PSA 9s sold privately recently for even more than that. And so you do just even a standard multiplier, I mean, in an average everyday card, your PSA 10 is going to sell for 3 to 4 times an SGC 9.5, a PSA 9. Right. And so that right there puts it at 50 million.
Right.
With rare cards, the PSA 10 often sells for many more times of a multiplier than that. But even if you're going to discount all of that, which I understand doing here because this card's very unique, the fact of the matter is, this is the Holy Grail trading card, and it only takes 2 bidders to just keep bidding at each other to drive the price up and up. All it takes is 2 people to say, I really want that card, and I'm willing to pay whatever it takes. And if you get 2 guys that are worth hundreds of millions or billions with that attitude, the card could sell for 100 million. It could sell for 150 million, and it would not surprise me if it actually did.
So how long do you think that card's been in a vault? Because I mean, when you talk about vintage cards, like even if they are encased in a graded slab, they still fade. It's just how cards are made with the die and everything. I mean, that card was absolutely pristine. Again, corners incredibly sharp, looked like it just got pulled out of the pack. I mean, if you're thinking about like how to preserve cards like that, I mean, you're talking about one that's been really well preserved.
The number, yeah, absolutely. And I Marshall acquired the card in, I believe it was 90, and he acquired the card in the early 90s. I forget if it was 92 or 96. The video goes into that. I think it was 96. But anyway, I don't know who had it before and how they kept it. I know since Marshall's had it, he's kept it vaulted. He's kept it secure. The key to preserving trading cards is to keep them out of light.
Yes.
Light is the number one thing that will fade a trading card. Keep it out of light. Obviously, keep it, encased, graded,
I mean,
put
he had
away.
This in like
don't put it in a binder.
And like a
don't put it in your bicycle
Bible,
spokes,
Yankees Bible.
Light though, keeping light away from it is the most critical thing. Humidity is also a thing as well, right? You don't want it in a humid environment, right? Because that can also, affect the card over time. So those are the main things. And this card, however it's been stored for all of these years, was stored in an exceptional manner because the card really does look brand new. I mean, it's hard to imagine looking at the card. That was my first impression. When I sat there and looked at the card, my first impression was, how does a card look this perfect when that card is 71 years old? It looks perfect. Like the white on it around the corners is a crisp white. It's not yellowed. The surface image on the card is a bright blue, the bright blue background behind Mickey Mantle. His photo is sharp and bright and vibrant. It's not faded. It doesn't look a day old, much less 71 years old. And that's one of the most striking things about it.
Yeah. So you said you learned a lot then coming off of this collection. And, we can talk about this particular card forever, but there's a lot that you've learned about general collecting and advice, as you said, like a wise old man to a younger student. What are the big things that you've learned? Let's go through those.
Awesome. So I got 10 things.
Okay, 10
I put together
things.
a little list. I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with the audience today.
Okay.
So we'll go through these one by one and talk about them and kind of see what you think of each of these, right?
Okay. All right. So what's number one then?
Experience comes through repetition. And if you're going to become a really, really great collector, you've got to become experienced at it, right? It takes, they say it takes 10,000 hours for people to master a skill or master a trait. And the same is true with becoming a great collector or becoming a great investor in sports cards. And when I asked Marshall Fogel many different times, like, how do you know this? Or how can you tell that? Or why do you think this is better than that? His answer sometimes was simply experience. I've been doing this for years and years and years. I've gone to all the nationals. For many years he did that. I've, been in tune with cards and in touch with cards for such a long time that I become experienced and I can just see these things now. And there's really no substitute for experience. One of the things that people kind of rag on me for, and I think this is fair. I think it's a fair criticism of me, is that I came back into the hobby in 2018, and I wasn't very experienced when I wasn't as experienced certainly as collectors that have been in the hobby for 10 or 20 years when I started doing my show in 2019, and I've gotten a lot smarter and wiser over the course of the last 5 years as I've now gained thousands and thousands of years of experience in the sports card hobby, and it's benefited me, and I feel much more confident today in my ability to buy good cards, make good investments, understand the direction the market is going versus, where I was 5 years ago. And that's natural. Through experience, through repetition comes experience, and through experience comes an understanding and knowledge and the ability to do things better.
Right. It's the day in, day out of it. And I think in general, you said that, coming in 2018 and 2019, you were a little less experienced, but now you do this day in and day out. I mean, this is your job. This is what you live and breathe. So those hours and that experience has get, and you know what, 5 years from now, you're going to say the same thing.
Sure,
I've learned a lot over the past 5 years because
I hope I do.
Each year you gain new insight.
I hope I do. I hope, like, if I'm as smart as I'm ever going to be today, then like what am I
What's the
doing for the
point?
rest of my life? Like I want to constantly be learning and evolving. And I always want to look back on a video I did 5 years ago and say, that wasn't the best piece of advice, or that wasn't the smartest trade decision or anything like that. That's how it's always going to be if I'm progressing well, right? And that's how I want it to be. And you know, Marshall's really big on, look, experience comes through repetition. He's absolutely right.
Right. Well, it's hard to understand the foresight, you know, of 5 years from now, but as long as you put in the work, I think that you'll get that for sure. And that's a great lesson to learn. But what is now the second? So repetition and insight and just doing it day in, day out for the knowledge of learning was the first one.
Yep.
What is number two?
Believe in your instinct. Believe in your gut.
The gut.
The gut feel. The gut. Because, you know, oftentimes if you really take some time to think about whatever you're looking to buy, whatever you're looking to invest, oftentimes you have good intuition within yourself. Like you can find the answers within yourself as to what you really would love to collect, what you'd really love to invest in, what you think is going to have value and is going to pique interest both for yourself and for others 10 or 20 years down the road. A lot of those answers are within. People, though, myself included sometimes, rush into deals, you know, or buy whatever's hot in the moment, or buy the shiny thing, right? It's super easy in the collecting world and in the investing world to chase whatever player is hot at that moment. You hear everyone talking about them. Everybody's posting about that particular card on Instagram. We got the player in our top 5. It's easy to like say like, oh, I've got to buy a Joe Burrow card because everyone else in the world's buying a Joe Burrow card, or, you know, that type of thing. And that oftentimes is the absolute worst possible time for you to buy that card. When you see a card show up in our top 5, oftentimes that's the wrong time to buy the card, because that's when interest is the highest, you know, prices have peaked, and it takes that player just doing incredibly well from that point forward in order to see their card prices continue to go up. Most of the time, there's a settling down of their card prices after the hype starts to fade a little bit. And if you take your time and really think about what you're buying and why, and build your collection strategically, believe in your gut, believe in your instinct, you are likely going to do well with that.
Now, sometimes they say that the gut will always battle with the head, then, because you're saying two things. You're saying trust your gut, trust your instinct, which I agree. But sometimes you have a gut to do something, but your head talks you out of it.
That's fair.
How do you battle that then?
Well, yeah, and I guess what I'm saying is don't buy into your own immediate, though, like FOMO reaction, which I guess sometimes your gut is like, oh, I got to get a Joe Burrow card. So that's the bad part of your gut. What I'm saying is the answers are within you. You can have and operate with the right instinct, but you do have to take a little bit of time to think about what is right. You know, what is right for you, and what you really think is strategically the right call, and what you believe in, and not just act on impulse or emotion.
Yeah, you can have and react with the right instinct, but don't respond to impulses.
Yeah. And ultimately, you know, if you're approaching this as a collector, you obviously want to collect what you love. And so that's always innate within you, right? I mean, collecting what you love it's a personal thing. What I want to collect is different than what you want to collect. So again, collect what you love, what your instinct attracts you to, and not what everybody else is going after because it happens to be hot in the moment.
Right. Well, but I feel like there's a contradiction there, right? So while something may be hot in the moment, what happens if you instinctually, like yourself, feel like that's a long-term play?
Oh, sure. Then you can, sure. Then you can go after that. Absolutely. But I think I just don't, people should not act as much as they often do on FOMO. Fear of missing out. Right. And the sports card hobby is driven a lot by FOMO. A player, you know, scores 55 points in a game, and then that night his cards are selling like crazy on eBay, or a rookie or a prospect gets called up to the majors and his cards are going crazy on eBay, and nobody wants to be the person who missed out on buying that person's cards.
Right.
But FOMO 8 or 9 times out of 10 gets you really like it doesn't it gets you in trouble. It gets you buying things you don't
FOMO
necessarily
makes
want to
great
buy.
content, but not great fiscal decisions.
Yes. Yeah.
All right.
And it's easy to fall into. I fallen
Yeah.
into it before. It's easy to fall into.
All right. So what is number 3 then? So we've got the first one was experience comes through repetition. Believe in your gut.
Yep.
And then the third one is
Play the long game.
okay.
Play the long game. Think about your collecting journey, not just in what you want, right now, what's going to be hot in 6 months, that type of thing. But think about what might be really relevant and really exciting to own in 10 or 20 or 30 years.
Okay.
Marshall Fogel acquired most of his collection in the 1990s. The prices he paid for everything were an absolute fraction of what they cost today. Some of his pieces in his collection that are worth a lot of money, he acquired later than that, but he was buying things that people weren't paying attention to. He was buying tickets before almost anybody was collecting tickets. He was buying Type 1 photos more recently before anyone was paying attention to Type 1 photos. So he really thought to himself, what is going to be relevant in terms of collectible pieces and in terms of players, like what's going to be relevant in society and cause people to say, wow, 20 or 30 years from now. And that's a much different perspective than how most people collect today. Because again, most people today go by Trevor Lawrence because he had some hot games at the end of the season last year and won a playoff game. And they're super excited about, Trevor Lawrence going into this season. And I'm not saying Trevor Lawrence is a good or bad buy. Maybe the guy goes on and has an incredible career, but that's thinking very in the moment, right? Whereas Marshall really tried to put intentionality into it and say, gosh, it sure seems like I can buy, cards and artifacts and that type of thing, all-time great pieces from all-time great baseball players. And because these players are so prominent and so woven into American history, and back then, this is, the early 90s, we were in the junk wax era. Everyone was paying attention to Derek Jeter and whoever the young up-and-coming players, Ken Griffey Jr., those guys, and they weren't paying, attention to
The legends.
Ty Cobb,
Yeah.
but Marshall Fogel was paying a ton of attention to the Ty Cobb market and what's going on, with Ty Cobb game used bats and jerseys and cards and all that kind of stuff.
So generally, everything that you're saying, props to him for looking and having that foresight to play the long game with those particular players. But nowadays, getting the materials and getting, the cards and the Type 1 photos and the bats and everything that he has now is almost impossible.
It is. And so the question
the question is, what long game do you play now? Because the long game shifted. You can no longer do the long game with Mickey Mantles or Ty Cobbs or, any of those because you're almost immediately priced out. So then I guess then they have to adjust the shift of like what becomes their long game.
You want to know what's really cheap right now?
What's really cheap right now?
Soccer.
To me, that is the perfect long game because there is nothing more that is going to shift in the general media Americans' mind than soccer. You have a World Cup coming in 2026. The marketing has already shifted to start promoting that last year. There's no reason why you won't be able to buy soccer today and make a profit on it in 3 years.
And if you look at the trend lines of, the number of kids that are playing soccer, if you
Harrison.
look at one of my sons, if you look
Which, by the way, I've seen videos from Kim. He's pretty good.
He's gotten pretty good. I'm pretty excited about him. We're putting him in one of those like actual academy training programs.
That's exactly what you should be
starting
doing.
in the fall. If you look at all the trend lines in America, the people, I saw some stat that the number of people that called soccer their favorite sport in America, if you rewind the clock 20 years ago, is 1% of Americans called soccer their favorite sport. Today, it's 8% of Americans that call soccer their favorite sport. That is a huge shift. Now, it still trails far behind football and baseball and basketball, but that's a seismic shift. If that continues to occur, if 15% of Americans call soccer their favorite sport in 10 or 20 years, if it gets up to 25% of Americans or something, I mean, it's going to be extremely relevant in this country. And I believe it will be, because a lot of parents are directing their kids to soccer because it's safer than football.
Right.
You're seeing more and more of the European games broadcast in America. The MLS has obviously increased in popularity and has expanded out.
The Premier League is coming over to the U.S. to play games.
There's a lot of positive signs there. So, and this is, by the way, this is not Marshall's prediction. We didn't talk about soccer.
This is a non sequitur.
This is just me speculating on what I mean, if you want to talk about like you just ask the question, like all that stuff Marshall has now is all super expensive.
Right.
Where do you start today if you want to buy something that is not nearly as expensive, but could be really relevant and, in 30 years? I personally would look at soccer. And there's other places that I'm sure the audience is going to look and everything as well. And
well, it's what their long-term game is.
Yeah, and they may not care at all about soccer. They may not like soccer. In which case, they don't collect it. Like collect something that you believe in and collect something that you love as well. But I think that's an interesting sport for sure.
Okay, so repetition.
Yep.
Trust your gut.
Yep.
Play the long game. So we've got 3 so far.
Yep.
What's number 4?
Buy less, but buy the absolute best quality possible.
Okay.
So Marshall's point here, and he's right, is that over time, people want the prized possession. They want the best quality thing that they can find. And whether it's any form of investing, we've seen it in real estate, where like the most prized pieces of land and the most prized homes oftentimes out-accelerate the average everyday home in the market, because there's a lot of supply of the average everyday home, but there's only one of that super unique, incredible prized possession. And we see it in art, and we see it in jewelry, and we see it in all of these different fields of collectibles, that oftentimes the number one, thing out accelerates everything else, because that's the thing that everybody wants. And that's the thing that billionaires will fight over and bid against each other. They want to buy something. And so Marshall's reaction is, make your collection smaller and really, really high quality. This has rubbed off on me. I have completely reshaped my collection over the course of the last year, and I'm still in the process of doing it. I have been selling a lot of my lower end cards that I accumulated from 2018 through 2021. I've been selling a lot of that stuff, and I've been taking the money and piling it up and putting it into 1 or 2 bigger cards. And I've been doing this consistently actually over the last several months. I haven't even shared a lot of my purchases yet with the audience. But that really resonated to me. I'd rather have 1 case full of exceptional stuff than, tons of shelves full of all kinds of, stuff that isn't that interesting because it's mass produced and whatever. And look, this is my philosophy, and this is Marshall's philosophy. There's many collectors out there that would completely argue against this philosophy. There's many collectors that say you're not even a collector unless you have 10,000 cards, in your collection or whatever. They collect wide. They like a whole, and that's great. Like, do it how you love to do it. But if we're talking about how to make your collection world class and exceptional and valuable in 20 or 30 years, then you should do it the way that I just said.
All right. So minimize and focus.
Yep.
What is one particular card that you are, maybe you haven't acquired yet, but you're focusing on? Wow. Do you want to tell the audience?
I sure, I will tell you. Well, so there's a couple of cards right now at auction, and I don't want to get bidders against me. Well,
when does the auction end?
There's not after the show comes out.
Oh, man.
Well, let me say this. Like, there's right now going on at Golden, I think it ends next week, that Dream Team auction.
Yep.
I mean, that's cool. There's stuff in there that's really cool. And like true one of a kind, cool stuff. I've actually got bids in on a couple of those things already. We'll see if they hold up. I imagine that auction's going to get pretty heated in the last
Especially,
day.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be able to hold on and win any of it in the last day, but we'll see. We'll see what happens there. But, no, there's some really special cards up at auction right now. The, Golden's doing like the Golden 100 with just some crazy cards. There's some crazy cards on PWCC. There's some big stuff out there right now, and some stuff that I think is just real special stuff that I'm consolidating into. So I'll let you know when if I win the auctions, I'll show up here in a month or so with some pretty awesome cards to look at.
Makes sense. Okay, so we are at repetition,
Yep.
right? Experience comes to repetition. Believe in your instinct. Trust in your gut. Believe in your choice. Play the long game. Buy less, but buy high quality.
Yep.
Number 5.
Baseball has a history that no other sport has in this country.
Okay.
And baseball in popularity has been waning in recent years, right? It used to be by far and away the number one sport in the country. Baseball and boxing were by far and away the two most popular sports in the country. Both have lost tremendous popularity, been passed obviously now by football, and in the case of boxing has been clearly passed by basketball and actually a multitude of other sports, right? But baseball has one thing that none of them really have, and boxing has this to an extent as well, and that is the history of the sport. Baseball has the richest history of any sport by far. And so as a collector, if you start getting into vintage, if you start getting into old items, if you start getting into collecting cards and memorabilia from yesteryear, you can't ignore baseball, because baseball's got the biggest and best and brightest selection of it. You know, there's some little bit of basketball from the 40s and the 50s and a little bit of football from that era as well.
A little bit of soccer also.
But there's so much baseball.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, baseball has been part of the American fabric since the turn of the century. And I mean, the 1900. And it has just been consistently strong, with stars going all back to the pre-World War I era. And it's just an incredible part of the history of this country. And so spending time with Marshall, 100% of Marshall's collection is baseball. And spending time with him, and really kind of, when you're with him, you just get kind of brought into the history of the game through all this incredible memorabilia. And that's really cool. And it's just neat how much history there is in baseball.
I would love for us to at some point talk about what we think the reason why the waning has become so prominent with baseball, because you're absolutely right. Baseball is woven very heavily into the fabric of just who we are as Americans, and, you know, especially within collectibles and cards and that type of thing. But it has been waning. It's been dropping in popularity. I mean, they're doing what they can with the pitch clock and all that stuff to sort of bring it back to modern watching habits. But I'd love for us to maybe one day get into the conversation of that, because I feel like there's a lot of loaded areas in that we can sort of dive into. But that's a good point. I mean, but what happened? I guess here's my question, because not everybody likes baseball. So if you're suggesting that baseball is a heavy sport, especially within the history and the fabric, how do people who aren't necessarily drawn towards baseball become drawn towards baseball? Is it the storytelling? I think
it's story. Well, it's storytelling and history, and that actually brings me to point number 6.
Does
right?
it? Oh, wow. Okay.
There you go. Perfect segue, right? My point number 6 is invest in cards and memorabilia that have a compelling story.
Okay.
And what I've learned from Marshall and others like Darren Rovell is that storytelling is such a key element to be able to show the value of something, to show the impact of something. And memorabilia actually has a lot more stories associated with it, as does tickets versus cards. The stories behind cards, there's not as many. There are some. There's some, obviously, 1952 Topps. That whole set is absolutely legendary. The Hannes Wagner T206 has a legendary story to it. Right. You know, there's certain cards that have legendary stories, but for the most part, cards are cards. And so the story is more about the player. The stories, in some cases, the story is a little bit about the set, if you're talking about like 90s inserts and how everyone was chasing this and everything like that. But a lot of it has to do with the player and the scarcity. That's what the story is most often with cards. With memorabilia, with tickets, it's a much more wide open space, because it can be, this was the bat from a particular game, or this was the jersey from a particular season, or this was the ticket from a particular moment in time when this thing happened. So there's a whole story to be told there. And storytelling is underrated. Like these great storytellers, which Marshall is, being able to hear him talk about the different elements of your collection, it draws you into the history. And so what I would say is, even for people who aren't diehard baseball fans, and I don't consider myself a diehard baseball fan, but I appreciate history.
Right.
And seeing Marshall's collection, it's part baseball, but it's a lot of parts like American history. And I think that part of it's really cool. And I think that's something that anybody can appreciate, even if they're not a sports fan.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, but you are talking about the sort of like the history of the collection, but you're also talking about the moment and the story behind it. Like you were talking about the Dream Team auction and the whole with the jerseys being signed and, you know, that being up in the dealership and then deciding to sell that. So like there's always, with any good artifact, card, memorabilia, etc., if there's a good story behind it, the draw and the pull towards that type of if I, you know, have this and I own this and this is in my collection, I have this other story to tell to add to my storybook. That's a nice feeling to, you know, like bring somebody in and be like, oh, well, this is the ticket from you know, Tiger Woods' first PGA tour, you know, et cetera. That type of thing where it's like this monumental moment.
Yeah, exactly. It's cool. It's cool.
Super cool. All right. So I'm just trying to recap for the audience so we know where we're at.
Well, we're on number 7.
We're on number 7. So repetition, trust your gut, play the long game, less is more, but focused, history with baseball. Baseball's got a big history. And then you got to tell a story.
Yep.
So now we're at 7.
We're going to get into life lessons here a little more with these last 4.
Okay.
I think these are really interesting. I asked my team who was out there with me spending this time with Marshall, because it wasn't just me. It was we have a great video crew here, and Charles is our head of production. And I said, you know, Charles, what did you learn from Marshall? And one of the things Charles said was hobbies are important for longevity and remaining engaged. And even better if you can find one that makes you money. And I think that this is very true because, you know, Marshall's in his 80s and he doesn't work professionally anymore or anything like that. But his passion for his collection is, I would say, as great today as it has ever been before. Like, he's extremely passionate about what he's built. He loves talking about it. He loves sharing it with others. And it's something that really keeps him going. Like, when you ask him about items in his collection, when he has the opportunity to talk about it, you can see it kind of reignites a fire within him. And I think it's really important to have that kind of thing. I mean, especially as you get older in life, you know, you're not going to have, you know, a family to raise anymore. You're not going to have a profession to keep up with anymore. And so then, like, what keeps you ticking?
Yeah.
And for Marshall, it's his collection. And I think that, among other things, he does a lot of other things as well, but his collection's part of it. And so I thought that the observation Charles made about hobbies being important to your longevity and remaining engaged, it was a great point. And it's very poignant. And I think that's a great thing about collecting, that it can keep you engaged and focused that way. Engaged
and focused, not only in like what you're doing, but just in within a community as well, right? It's a community that you've entered into, you become a part of. And then that adds another layer of the fabric of your family, you know? So when you talk about being in a hobby, whether it's, you know, a hobby that you're doing, whether it's, you could be doing sports, it's the same type of thing where it's like you're adding in the longevity of like your well-being because you've attached to something that you care so much about. So I think that's a great point. Especially it's really nice if it makes you money. Yep. Because I mean, we're gonna get into on the bit segment about just how great this collection is, because I'm super excited. And I actually have one big question that I'd really like to ask you at the very end. But I know that we've got a few other things to get through before we get to that moment. So you've talked about now being, and sort of changing the last couple ones as being more like life lessons. We've just talked about it being important for your longevity to be focused and narrowed in, and part of that hobby. What would other life lessons be? So we're at 7, so we've got like 8, 9, and 10 now. Prioritize relationships and give people your full attention. Okay. This was another observation Charles made spending that time with Marshall, and Marshall, he really does that. You can tell that he is very invested in his relationships with people, and he became very invested in his relationship with me and our team, and he really
focused on spending time with us, giving us whatever we needed, wanting to make sure that you know, we were taken care of, and that we were going to be able to take these moments with him and turn this into great videos for the public to see. And you can tell that he's you know, very focused on his relationships with with different people and how important that is. And I think sometimes, you know, the world's very fast paced, and it's easy for people to take relationships for granted, or to not invest in a relationship to see how that relationship and that friendship can really grow over time. And Marshall is one that is good to invest and spend the time and check up on you, and it's lovely. And I think it's an important lesson. Slow down sometimes and invest in the relationships.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all see that with just in general when we are out and about, and we see that, you know, Marshall's calling you to have a quick chat and that type of thing, which has become more common, which is a great thing to see. But I think added onto that is like one of his core drivers and any of the content that we've done with him is the education tool of it, which is like really trying to give back to the hobby that he spent so much time in, so many years in, that he loved so much. And like whenever we go, he's always like, what other elemental or educational piece can we add to this? Because it's important to have that relationship with everyone else as a collector to encourage and help and grow. And you don't find that a lot sometimes with the way that, I guess, like you said, society has sort of become, where it's almost, you know, I've lived in LA, so I can say this. It's like almost the LA mentality. Like you meet someone, you're like, hi, who are you? What can you do for me? Because it's focused on promoting and getting yourself forward. But that's a great point. You become personable with the person you're talking to. You've committed that time. You've committed that effort in your relationship with that person. Like just dive into it. Like really get to know the people that you're around. I think it's a great point.
Yeah.
All right. Number 9. What's number 9?
Number 9 is share your knowledge with others.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Segue.
I mean, Marshall, like the fact that Marshall has been willing to spend as much time with us as he has, he's really passionate about sharing what he's learned with other people. And this is true off the camera as well. Like I've had some really long conversations with Marshall about the hobby, about collecting, about, you know, how to approach certain things. And it's, he's always wanting to give me advice, you know, give me tips, help me become a stronger collector. And it's genuine that he wants to share that. He wants to share his knowledge. He wants to help other people positively with the knowledge that he shares. And I think that that's an admirable thing. And we're, you know, we love being able here at Sports Card Investor, we love being able to take knowledge and share it with the world. I mean, that's what we do well, right? And sometimes it's our own thoughts and beliefs and opinions, and sometimes it's the opinions and thoughts and beliefs of other collectors. And being able to take Marshall's story and share it in that way has been really special.
Awesome. I didn't even know that was going to be the next point.
Yeah.
But that's fun. That's neat. So we've now reached
the final one.
The final one,
Yeah.
the final point. What is the final point? The lesson that you learned from Marshall?
Don't take life too seriously and have fun.
Yeah.
I mean, despite the fact that Marshall has probably a $200 million collection.
That was the question I was going to ask, is how much do you think it is?
Yeah, he's probably got $200 million in his collection, but he just wants to have fun. He doesn't take it too seriously. He doesn't take life too seriously. He thinks it's great that he's got all of this stuff, but he loves to laugh and he loves to have fun and he loves to make jokes. And you can tell that he's always seen the humor in the world, and he's not taken things too seriously. And it's such a good attribute. And it's so great to see somebody of that age with that wealth who's just
Living
simply
life.
wanting to have fun and have laughs and get to enjoy people and build relationships and not take anything too seriously. It's just great perspective, like seeing that, you know, it's like at the end of the day, we're although we all are trying to push in our careers and build and be successful, at the end of the day, it's about enjoying life. And as you get older, then it becomes, I think, even more
important about enjoying life. Yeah,
100%. And so, you know, seeing Marshall do that is it's really cool.
That's so awesome. We can all tell that you have a real reverence for him. So it's real neat to sort of go through all of this. So just to sum up a lot of what you've said, because I want to, you know, make sure that we have our 10 points, which is, you know, repetition, believe in your gut, play the long game, less is more, focus on quality, baseball, invest in memorabilia that tells a story. Hobbies are important for longevity as far as remaining engaged, especially if it makes you money. Prioritize the relationships, share your knowledge, and don't take life too seriously.
Yeah. A lot of lessons there from Marshall.
Yeah.
A lot of great lessons.
So has he said what he's going to do with his collection?
He's joked about it, but the truth is what he's going to do with it is he's going to, you know, put it into trusts for his kids.
Right.
He's going to try to preserve it and keep it together as best he can.
Right.
His kids seem to have interest in not selling it all, but rather, you know, keeping the collection, holding it. And he'd love for it to be shown in museums. So he would love for it to be lent to a museum or various museums to be put on display. His kids would own it, but the museums would caretake for it and display the collection. He wants to share it with the public, and he wants the public to be able to see all these great artifacts.
Sharing the knowledge.
Yeah.
That's the part of the point right there. All right. So you've seen the collection, and you've been to and seen the collection twice now. You've spent multiple days there. You've seen a good bit. Again, we've only been able to really show the audience, as Sports Card Investor, the tip of the iceberg there. So you've seen a good chunk of the iceberg. Out of the whole collection, this is the bit segment.
Yep.
Out of the whole collection, what would be the one thing that you would want to get?
Well, that obviously is an unbelievably tough question. Like spending the time there.
What's the one thing you want to walk away with?
So I'm sure for most people, the obvious answer would be the 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle.
Okay,
'cause that's
that's
the most valuable
off the
card.
plate. You
Yeah, and
can't
I'm
do
not
that.
going to go there
Yeah.
because I mean, even though that is, that would, I guess, be the number one thing I would want.
Yep.
But that's obvious because it's valuable.
Right.
He's got such a wide collection. It's crazy to think about, but he's got some really cool Jackie Robinson stuff. And to me, out of all the players in baseball history, Jackie Robinson's the one who I think has the most incredible story.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, just because it transcends baseball, it goes far beyond the baseball diamond. The stuff he went through,
Absolutely.
how he changed the sport, how he changed the country.
Yeah.
So he's got some stuff like some letters that Jackie Robinson had written to fans or colleagues. He's got copies of handwritten, signed Jackie Robinson letters, some with really interesting content, talking about, you know, some of his struggles and various things. And so some of that stuff was really cool. But he's got one other historical piece that just, the first time I saw it, it just blew me away. And that was Lou Gehrig, who was obviously an exceptional baseball player and then got Lou Gehrig's disease. You know, it became named after him, right? Yep. Where he, you know, he obviously had to stop playing baseball when he was still doing great in his career. His career ended prematurely, and he, you know, passed away very young from Lou Gehrig's disease. And Lou Gehrig gave this famous farewell speech at Yankee Stadium where he was, it was kind of a farewell ceremony for him. And he said a few words, and that was his "I'm the luckiest man alive" speech. Very famous speech. And after he gave the speech, and there's, you know, all these photos of him giving this speech, the Yankees presented him with this framed, large framed piece, and it's a poem. And it's a poem about never giving up, and they presented that to him. And there's all these newspaper photos, and Marshall Fogel has the Type 1 photo of Lou Gehrig, you know, with the piece. And there were apparently two of them made, kind of the original, and then I think a secondary one, which I think went to his family or something of that nature. Marshall has one of these pieces.
Yeah.
I think he said he acquired it from Lou Gehrig's family or through somebody who got it from Lou Gehrig's family many, many years after the fact. And it's literally the framed piece of the poem that was presented to Lou Gehrig on that day. And to me, that's just like, I remember seeing, you know, as a kid, I remember hearing about that moment, learning about Lou Gehrig, seeing photos of that moment.
Right.
And I remember seeing that thing in photos from when I was a kid, and then to see that or the you know, only existing copy of it, it's like, wow, like what a moment in time piece of history. And there it is, you know. That was pretty incredible. So I'd say that was definitely something that really struck me.
Wow. What an item, what a moment. I mean, I feel like you could talk for hours about Marshall, but I'm glad that you were able to sum up like a lot of your top takeaways from what you've learned from him, because I think that it's a really valuable and sound advice, whether you're a collector, whether you're just somebody for business or living life in general. These are all really good tips and wise thoughts and ways to live life. So I think that this was a really good episode.
This was a fun episode. I'm glad we got to do it. And for anybody who hasn't seen the videos we've done with Marshall Fogel, you got to go watch them. There's some from the last couple of weeks, and there's also some from last year. Yeah. And if you go to our Sports Card Investor channel on YouTube, there's a playlist called the Marshall Fogel playlist, and you should go watch all of them. It's really worthwhile.
So nice.
And of course, this show is available on YouTube under the Geoff Wilson Show. It's also available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So make sure you're subscribed to the Geoff Wilson Show everywhere.
Yep. Put us in your earbuds and see you next week.
There we go. Appreciate you guys. Take care.